Welcome to The Art of Growth. I'm Joel Hubbard.
And I'm Jim Zartman, and we are continuing our series. We have been talking through the different parts of our new book that is out now called Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers. This is all about the instincts, and we have seen how important this is. This is something that is just primal. It's in us. We often talk about the instincts as pre-thought. This is a mechanism that's driving so much of our lives. And so we're talking through this series. You can order the book on Amazon now. There's a link in the description. Last week, we were talking a little bit about the stack. So we each have a dominant instinct. Then we have a secondary instinct that we talked about how it can serve the first. It's a vehicle that gets your dominant to where it needs to go. And then we have this third instinct, this tertiary, as we call it in the book. And it can be a blind spot. We've talked about it being resisted or repressed or something that makes us feel not as confident. We talked about how it can even make us feel not just insecure, but if we go towards growth in this area that we feel like we could be at a loss for something or we're going to lose part of who we are. There's all of these feelings, these instinctual feelings that can come up with that third instinct. And so for simplicity's sake, we can call it a blind spot for today, because that's what we call it in the book. We have a whole chapter on blind spots. But today's episode, we wanted to talk a little bit through two parts. So this first part, we're going to talk about what is the downside if this is your lowest instinct, if you struggle with this instinct, with each of the three. And then the second part of the podcast, we'll talk about how to develop a bit more in each of these instincts and develop more of a baseline competency. Because a lot of times we're aware of the costs, but we don't necessarily know what to do about it. And I know this was true for me, and that this has been one of the most profound learnings in my journey, I would say so far, was learning what my blind spot was when it came to my instincts and how it was impacting my whole life, had impacted my life, and why I wanted to grow in it. And that it's been one of the most intense growth edges along with learning my type. So we're going to talk through the hunters, farmers, and teamers and what happens when each is the blind spot. So we'll start with the hunter. So Joel, what do you see happens when the hunter is the repressed instinct in someone, that they have a hard time accessing this part of themselves that leans into adventure or risk or finding hidden resources, that has this energy of pursuing the possible and the new? And what happens? What does it look like when this is repressed?
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about it in at least a couple ways, maybe a third way, but the first two is how it affects you personally, and then how it impacts other people as well.
Awesome.
So the first one is how it impacts you is really going to be an area for each of you who are listening to this, is to pay attention to in what way is it limiting me? What way is it preventing me from living more fully into my dominant instinct? That's the surprise. Because the belief that we have, as you were saying, is that by living in our dominant instinct, or by trying to access the tertiary one, we are actually, in some ways, not robbing ourselves of what the dominant instinct is looking for. And that's quite the opposite. It's actually, the truth is that when we're living too much from the dominant instinct and the secondary, that we're not living fully into the dominant instinct. So we'll do this by way of the hunter and talking about the ways that can be a problem. So don't go digging, but you'll see the problem if it's obvious, if it's happening to you right now. If you're, say, the other two in whatever stacking order, whether it's teamer first or farmer first, you're going to find that after a while, you start to see maybe the teams or the groups or the family system, it's not thriving anymore. It's kind of starting to run out. Because any closed system eventually runs out of food, of resource. The hunter instinct knows this intuitively. In fact, to the degree that that's its only way of surviving is believing that it must leave this system in order to go and find something fresh to bring back to the whole. And I'm aware of the reality of farming, that it is if you're doing it well, it's a self-propagating system. But here's the deal.
It's regenerative, yeah.
It's regenerative. But here's the deal. You have to include something or introduce something into the soil to keep it fresh. Otherwise, the soil runs out.
Yeah.
So even farmers have figured out you still need some of that outside, something that comes from outside the system in order to feed the system. And that's the intuition of the hunter instinct. So that is one of the indications you can look in your own life. And is what I'm doing now starting to rob me? I remember someone saying to me, I do the same thing exercise-wise. I've done the same thing every day for years until I wore out my knee completely.
Yeah.
And it was like, yeah, because you couldn't mix it up. I was like, no. There's no design. And that's the hunter instinct says, we need something new. We need something to change here. So that's how it robs you of potential. Like if you introduce something new, as farmers do, introducing nutrients into the soil,
rotating
the crops.
Like that's what I thought of when you're talking about doing the same exercise every day and wearing out one thing. This is what happens when we plant the exact same thing in the soil that actually led to the Dust Bowl of the late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
The topsoil blew away in the wind because the same crop kept being harvested over and over instead of being regenerative and shifting it and rotating the crops. So they were trying to work with the seasons, but they also needed to work with the centuries. A much wider picture. So
Bigger
it's like
picture,
that.
Yeah.
So if you do the same exercises, you're going to wear out the joints. Your body has a lot more adaptability in it.
Yeah.
If you harvest the same crops, you're going to burn out the soil.
But I hope you see that it's really to serve the dominant instinct. Like farm away.
Yeah.
But in order to do that at its highest levels, you're going to have to introduce something new. Same thing goes, by the way, for the teamer. If you're the teamer and you're not introducing something new, eventually the team starts getting bored. It starts getting tired. It starts wearing itself out. And sometimes you need to mix it up or even do a little bit more self-revealing, like open up and share a little bit about your own story yourself, because that introduces something new and the team thrives into the surprise of teamers. It's like, but it's not about me. It's about the whole. It's not about, well, yes, but when you reveal a little bit about yourself, you're always so surprised. And for the hunter, it's like, well, no duh. It's so obvious. If you reveal a little of yourself, guess what you get? You get greater participation because people know you more.
Yeah.
And now you can lead a little bit more by influence than just by simply, here are the roles, here's what you should be doing, we're all contributing. All right, so that's how it benefits you when you realize that there's something that's no longer working. But also what happens is if you introduce the hunter into your life a little bit more, you also recognize hunters now around you because it's no longer entirely your blind spot. Because if it's your blind spot, you don't see hunters. You just see bad versions of the teamer or the farmer. Misbehaving.
Oh, wow.
Instincts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, you're just a bad version, and so I've got to rein you in.
That's interesting. There's a couple things I've noticed with this when this is a blind spot. Because a lot of times they won't rein people in, because one of the things that I've seen when people are lowest in this instinct is often they have a hard time asserting themselves.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So
you're talking about the teamer instinct?
If they're low in the hunter instinct.
Yeah. Oh, gotcha.
So those low in the hunter instinct will often, they'll have a hard time asserting themselves, being confrontational, allowing themselves to experience the competitive side in different environments, putting themselves out there, because there is a risk to that, right? So if the hunter instinct is the part of us that longs for excitement, risk, new opportunities, then it can feel simply like risk to assert yourself, to put yourself out there. And so going up and talking to a stranger, even being willing to say, I disagree in certain circumstances. When this is a really repressed instinct, sometimes it can be hard to access that aspect of them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. even if they're not asserting and going and trying to, rein in or get a handle on the hunter on that team, is that they might not see the hunter or the hunter's needs, and they certainly won't value the hunter as a means to then helping to serve the team. And that is, I think, where you lose the ability to make your, say, teamer instinct really thrive at the organizational level, right? Because you're now ignoring the hunter, and the hunter isn't participating any longer in that environment.
Right.
It's a big part of it is like, how do you get these different instincts? And I mean, we could go on and talk about everything from change. If you're trying to introduce change into your, organization, but you're hunter blind.
Yep.
Well, you're not going to get the hunter to actually participate or be involved because they need to be involved at the front edge of that. If you involve them at the front edge of that, now the change goes so much better. So there's so many effects, negative effects it has when you're hunter blind. But when you wake that up inside you, now you see it in other people. How you treat, by the way, the hunter instinct in yourself, how you treat it is how you will also treat the hunters around you.
That's what I wanted to bring up, because a lot of times what I've seen is those who are hunter blind perceive hunting as a threat. So it threatens the system that you want there to be, the way that things should be. Mm-hmm. So all of us have a way that we think the world should be.
Oh, yeah.
And if your blind spot is in whichever of these arenas, but right now we're talking about the hunter arena, if that's your blind spot, then you will see it as not as a solution, but as a threat, as a possible problem to the solution you're trying to provide.
Yes, 100%.
And that is the thing that, if this is not at least brought up to a baseline competency, it can create an issue.
I have sat on teams where my team leader was hunter blind, and there was a change needed. And the leader would go, okay, I know none of us like change. I know change is really hard on everybody. And I'm sitting there going, what the F are you talking about? Like, this is obviously the most exciting day, is we're going to have something new, finally. And like feeling so underutilized in that space. And then anything that could produce change, I would suggest, was always being like, nope.
Was seen as a threat.
As a threat.
These are some of the common effects that can happen when someone is really hunter blind.
Yeah.
Like, we're talking in extremes right here, right?
Obviously,
but
yes.
Just because it's your third instinct doesn't mean you're completely hunter blind, but we're talking about these are the negative consequences at the extreme. But even on a day-to-day basis, sometimes you can miss seeing the opportunities that are right in front of you. You can miss asserting yourself even when you feel like you need to. A lot of times I feel like these are the people who are posting the memes about like owning your voice and speaking up for yourself and like saying the thing, because they're trying to bring this to the act. Yes, exactly. They're trying to activate something they have a sense is important.
Sure.
But it feels like a threat to do that for them.
Yeah.
Even though it's once they've done it enough, it's probably going to produce a result. So let's talk about if the farmer instinct is the blind spot.
Yeah. That's not
and we can
hard.
both speak from a little bit of experience on this one.
Yeah. How much time do we have?
This isn't our therapy session, but we'll talk a little bit about it,
Yeah. So this, again, back to the limiting factor it can have on us individually, but also how it impacts other people negatively. All right. So farmer instinct, again, we don't go looking for, I need to develop the farmer instinct. I need to just do this. No, look for where the problem is in your life currently. And likely it's going to have something to do with the farmer instinct if it's your blind spot. And so whatever your first one is, whether it's hunter or teamer, that loop will produce this constant need for being with people, a constant need to be producing changes, meeting with other people, having, new endeavors, things that are communal. I mean, it's just a lot of people. And so the stimulation, the energy, the communal experience, all of that is so good. But if you don't have that farmer instinct, you start to deplete yourself of resource. So now you're always going out, you're always meeting with people, You're always responding to people's needs because one of the things that's interesting about the teamer instinct, and I've fielded this question with a bunch of teamers, do you feel a sense of responsibility for the group even if you're not in
100%.
charge? And it's overwhelmingly yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. So this is a new thing. Again, we're talking about because some people think about responsibility as something that's type specific. It is, but it's also very instinct specific. You can feel so responsible that you are not pulling away to be responsible for yourself and responsible for your own needs. Right? And so that's an interesting thing about that mix of hunter-teamer, teamer-hunter is there's not a whole lot of self-care going on. There's not a whole lot of dialing down, of de-escalating, of understimulating yourself in order for the ground to lie fallow, as, the ancients would do for a period of time for it to restore itself, prior to the invention of, modern farming technology. We had to leave the ground to be still for a little while. And this is actually really good for our bodies and our minds as well, is to not be listening to a podcast, constantly, always trying to learn more, do more. It's just, and farmer types will struggle with that as well. For the hunter and teamer and hunter, it's really good to kind of have that quiet and have that nothing, or to do something where you are, like you, in your case of, biking when it's a little warmer than this, and, going out for a 50-mile bike ride and what it does to you restoratively.
Oh, huge.
Right. That's the part that actually then serves, because then you'll have an idea that hits you when you're on a long bike ride that has to do with the social sphere or the teamer sphere, right? Which is so fascinating how that works. It's like the very thing that we fear it's going to pull away from. No, it actually contributes massively so.
Yep.
So proper rest, proper diet, proper exercise, managing your financial resources. We've had to learn a lot doing this business, The Art of Growth, because it's, man, that requires a lot of farmer stuff. And
it really does. And this is something that when those who are farmer blind, like I would want to just be encouraging that it can be developed. But there is an aspect of like, it can feel daunting, overwhelming to do the basics around planning, structure, like the patience of organization, actually sitting down and going through a lot of information, like calculating. I remember watching, it was one of the guys who was on that British car show that became the Grand Tour on Amazon, but he now has there's a show called Clarkson's Farm. So he actually decides to get out of that business and then get a farm and go through this process. And he's just constantly overwhelmed. He's a very hunter type, I think, but he's constantly overwhelmed by all of the details and the compliance. And there's a guy who's basically on the show that's always annoying him because he's just going through all of these details and compliance. And when that's blind spot, that feels very overwhelming until you actually have experienced it. Then it actually, it does free you to do the things that you're great at. But it can feel like I was making fun of the memes in the other one. So I would say the meme for this as the blind spot is probably the shirts of the cars that say, I hate adulting.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to do any adulting today, because that's kind of what it feels like. This is a lot of adulting.
Very much. Yep. It's something that ends up actually feeding you and restoring you. I remember deciding, like, I always loved having a glass of wine or a beer at night and eating at whatever time I wanted to eat at. So if it was 10 o'clock and I'm hungry, I'm going to eat something. Yeah. If it's 11 o'clock and I'm hungry, I'm going to eat something. And then realizing, like, this is affecting my sleep cycle significantly, and I already struggle with sleeping. And then deciding I didn't want to do it anymore, but not as a rule, not as sort of like, well, that's what integrating the farmer instinct means, is I must do this.
Right.
But it was more of like, how is this robbing me of what my hunter instinct really wants? It's like, well, I want to be able to be totally present to people and really see them and, coach at my highest level. This thing is robbing me of that. And so that's what we mean is look for the problem in your loop or in your dominant instinct, at least start there. And you probably notice it has something to do with that repressed or that, blind spot instinct.
The blind spot is often the spot where you're limited.
It definitely limits you, yes.
You're limited to the impact you actually want to have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think this is one that for both of us, we learned like this is getting in my way.
Yeah.
I used to be so disorganized. I was in my late 20s and I was in this job where I almost lost my job because of my lack of organization. And it's funny how my dominant instinct showed up in my response to that. When I had this little sit down meeting and like, this is what we need to see. But what bothered me was all of these meetings, my little teamer instinct, dominant, it bothered me that all of these meetings had to happen within the team and these other people, that I cost the organization that time because they were trying to solve my lack. And so when I realized what I was costing the team, where they were having to solve, the actual way that I apologized was, I'm so sorry, and I'm committed to figuring this out so that it's not coming at a cost of the team, my lack in this ability. So I will figure out a way to do this. And then for a while, I actually got super rigid. I wrote down every single thing I did, how I spent every bit of my time, went to an extreme because I saw that the cost that my disorganization was having on a wider
that's
group.
really good. That's insightful too, about how you experienced both the feedback and then what you did as a result of the feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I saw it was actually impacting the area I wanted
to be impactful,
which was in that teamer space and having a positive impact on the wider team. Yeah. So when this is a blind spot, we have a hard time sometimes doing the practical things that impact everyone.
Yeah. You just described how it impacts other people and beyond just like how it impacts you.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens for, even our business and starting the Art of Growth.
Yeah.
When we began, it began as a hobby. It's funny how we thought it was a business, and other people, I kept hearing others referring to it as some friends of mine who were pretty straight with me, and they were like, yeah, you got a hobby. It's like, no, I got a business. No, it's a hobby. It's not a business yet.
We only saw it as a hobby the first couple of years. We're like, oh, it's just a podcast. And then it was like, oh, well, then there's this like little side hustle kind of thing. And then it was like, well, if we actually want this to be a business, you got to have lawyers. You got to hire this. You have to fill out this paperwork. You have to file this trademark. You have to like all of that.
And that's just setting it up. And then after that, it's like, what are you going to do? What's your business model? How you going to, like all these things that just was overwhelming.
I still can't answer that.
I know, right?
We're still working on some of this.
We're still working on it, but it's definitely like, well, do we want to have this impact? And you and I both wanted to have an impact.
That's it.
You and I both wanted to reach many people and coach many people and put out good content because that mattered to us. And the only thing that was preventing us from doing that was the farmer instinct, which it still is. It's still that's the limiting factor is, doing that. But we've done a whole lot of growth in that space in the last 2 years. But that's what was very revealing was you can push your hunter and your teamer as much as you want, but the thing that's limiting you from really impacting more people happens to be the farmer instinct.
Yeah. So let's talk about if the teamer instinct is the blind spot. So yes, when I see people having the teamer instinct as a blind spot, there's a few different things, but they tend to feel a bit more isolated. They're not quite sure of where they belong or who they belong with. And part of this is they have a hard time spotting safe people. So I've seen this show up a lot in people's, whether it's their dating life or their work life, but it's like hard for them to spot the safe people to be around, the good people to be around. If someone reading that person to know, would they make a good partner? Would they make a good collaborator? And they have stories where relational things have gone really wrong. And a lot of times they have a long list of all of these situations that they found themselves in that ended up being really relationally damaging.
Yeah. It's why you want to ask yourself, what's the problem here? Because I've talked to, or what's the problem in my life right now? Because I've talked to people that are blind in this area and they don't see it. It's like, honestly, I don't even see a need for having this social thing or this teamer instinct. It's like, I'm happy with my family. I'm happy with my small circle of friends. I'm good. Like, why would I need anything more? Right? But the thing that oftentimes shows up for them is, but you probably not developing that any bigger or any broader. You're not getting anything fresh. So similar to the hunter instinct, the hunter brings in something fresh, but so does the teamer. The teamer is broader in its appeal. So it reaches out beyond itself. And that is what happens when you lack that, is your circle is small, but then you wear that out. It starts to get tired. You're not getting that fresh flow of new blood in the system. It's funny, I've tried to belong sometimes to these cliques. And generally what I found with really small cliques is they don't have a strong teamer instinct. It might be the second, but it's really almost never really strong, unless it's led by a cult leader, in which case then it's different. But generally speaking, cliques.
Well, those still self-implode.
Like yeah, it's the reason
it's on its way. Self-implode.
Oh, 100%. Right. It's always on its way to imploding.
Right.
And you can feel it because you're in it, and there's so much infighting, and there's so much even cliques within cliques. And it's like, what is this? I remember entering into one and I thought, it was like this. I was trying to fit, and it was years ago, and I was trying to fit, and I saw this group, and it was like, oh man, they seem to have it. They're very exclusive. I want to belong to that. I want to feel like I'm on the inside of that. And I finally got in on the inside, and what I saw on the inside was like horrifying. It was like, you guys don't actually like each other very much. Kind of a clique that was exclusive to.
That's funny because that's the teamer instinct is non-exclusive.
Right. Well,
that's a big aspect of it.
That's what I'm saying is I don't think it was their dominant. Even if it was their second, it was like not a very developed.
So the group was blind to the teamer instinct.
Yeah, I'm saying the group I think was blind to the teamer instinct. If the leader had teamer, which I believe the leader did at the time have the teamer instinct, it wasn't functioning at a high level. It was very survival rather than thriving kind of way of going about it. So that's where it becomes very divisive internally. It can be even in agreeable circles. What you can end up having is not that let's work collaboratively together towards something greater and bigger than ourselves. It becomes very much about itself. And the focus is too small and too narrow to really cause the thriving of the organism. And that's something that if you're social blind, you don't see it until it happens. It's just, if your team are blind, you're going to be going along and you wonder why there's not so much of that thriving energy to that group. And that's because the teamer instinct by nature, particularly when it moves from surviving to thriving, it's just moving towards what's good for the whole. Right. What moves us towards something greater than ourselves. And so you can see causes that become the thing that pulls people towards that thing. Yeah. But when you don't have anything pulling you upward and forward, you are looking inwardly, and then you deplete yourself and you deplete your environment. And that's what I've really benefited from when I watch the teamer instinct at its best, is it is pushing outward towards the greater good for the whole, usually something of a mission or a purpose that's guiding that whole thing.
And sometimes when I've seen this be the repressed instinct, over time you see people's, even the circle they have, shrink, where there tends to be a more isolating effect, because the teamer instinct, it wants to include. It wants to bring people into something. It desires that collaborative thing, but it desires belonging, and it desires to bring others into it and to go into being a part of it. So one of my friends said, you can either find a family or join a family, but it's always trying to do one of those things. Yeah. As someone who's moved and lived in lots of different places and cities, it was very easy to create community wherever I've been. So I think when you've moved or you find yourself in a totally different life stage, I see a lot of people struggling with this. So all of a sudden, they had a group of friends. They got a little older. They got married. They started having kids. They had a job. And then all of a sudden, it's like, well, how do you make friends as an adult? This is something that I think I hear people who struggle with this instinct say as well. Like, how do you make friends as an adult? I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not that hard. Again, that's the instinct. Yeah. And so this is the instinct that gives you that ability to find places of belong where it's not so in or out. It needs to look a certain way, because you're always seeing the people you meet as an opportunity to expand yourself, not as someone who needs to be on board with me or agree with me. It's this energy of, hey, we're actually all in this together.
Yeah.
And the teamer really does believe that. Like,
Yeah.
we really are all in this together. And so including a little bit of this makes you a lot less divisive. It makes you relax, actually.
I was just thinking that word, relax. There's a relaxing effect to that. There's a broadening effect to that. There's a purposeful effect to it. The purpose becomes something greater than oneself and greater than one's own preservation or one's own need for hunting, need for more. It becomes, there's the bigger thing that we're all about. And so that participation for the greater good becomes something rewarding for those who lack that, I think.
Yeah. We've talked about this and how sometimes people who are low in this, they don't really see the value of it. There's not like I need to like include this. Because the way our society, particularly right now, is structured is it tends to be a little bit more isolated. It tends to be a little bit more, cliquey. And even if I don't know anyone directly who agrees with me, I can join some online group and where we think similarly. You can find niches. So a lot of times this isn't immediately obvious why you need this, but like I've witnessed the cost of this missing, and the cost of this missing is a long-term sense of being able to navigate, being a part of something, being adaptable enough to shift into different eras of your own life even and navigate it.
Yeah.
So this is something that when this is a blind spot, people don't know how to navigate the stages of life where you have to interact with, work alongside, coexist with, you're interdependent with people on different jobs, different teams, different experiences. And you tell a story in the book about someone who keeps getting passed over for promotions. And when he sits down to ask his boss about it, his boss says, you don't have the wider...
The wide view, the broad view.
Yeah, you don't have the wider view of the company in mind. You don't see the bigger picture.
Yeah, you don't see the effects, everything, all these, right? Because if you don't see the bigger, broader picture, you can't see the effects that small decisions you're making might have. Yeah. And I think that's part of the challenge with hunters and farmers is there's oftentimes, particularly when those two are paired up together, whether it's farmer first or hunter first, is you don't have that view of how your behavior affects and impacts the whole, or how decisions that you're making impacts the broader network that you're part of. There's so many other pieces we can't even touch on or get too deep into, but it's loneliness, the desire, the need for connection. These things are epidemic in our world right now. And that is because of the individualism has run its course in our country and in many parts of the world. And it's because we've overemphasized the hunter and farmer in organizations and in many other areas of life. And so it's like even an organization where we've been coaching for a while is very hunter-farmer, and they're quite large. And that has run its course. And it's caused a lot of problems because they don't have a unifying goal, a unifying purpose, an integration of the entire system. And so I think the new person in charge now hopefully has that. It seems like that individual does. But that's a big part of what happens when you are teamer blind is you don't even realize how things are falling apart and you don't know why. And you don't know why you're feeling increasingly lonely, even if you have a small group of people that you're always with. It's like, I'm losing my sense of, because we're made for more. We're made for that sense of connection to the whole and that meaning that comes from our contribution as part of the whole and seeing its value and its impact. And I think that's why the teamer instinct is so valuable.
Someone was just telling me about what happened at the Nokia company and why it fell apart. And as soon as he said it, I was like, I totally forgot about Nokia. That was like huge.
Yes, I know, right?
They were huge. So in 2007, they actually had 49% of the cell phone, like that space. So I was looking up what happened, and it contributed, like they talked about 4 major things that contributed to it. One of them is they didn't recognize emerging technologies and the shifts to things like the iPhone. They were really behind the ball on that kind of stuff. So they were lacking some of the change. part. But that was the external. Internally, they were actually pitting teams against each other to compete and creating different operating systems and stuff like that, basically so that individual teams, they weren't competing with the outside world, they were competing internally to see which project got chosen. And it listed like 4 things, and it said they weren't communicating their marketing and their messaging and who they were externally. It listed 4 reasons, and what you see is they were completely derived of the teamer instinct. So
do you mean deprived of the teamer instinct?
There was no teamer instinct that was running it. Internally, it was overly hunters versus hunters. And on the grand scale, it was like they were overusing the farmer instinct and not adapting to new markets. They were locked into what they were already doing.
Yeah.
And they had built it up over time since the late 80s to like 2007, to where they were literally the leader, 49% of the market. And 6 years later, they had 3% of the market. So like when you talk about the costs of each of these instincts, and I tell the story in the book about how the lack of certain of these instincts in certain companies, we saw them go under, but I didn't tell the Nokia one because that was one I was just researching yesterday. But you see, when any of these are missing, it's a major threat to an organization's long-term stability.
Yeah.
And that was just one that when it read the analysis of like what went wrong at this company, I just went, there was no teamer instinct.
Yeah.
That was the cost.
Yeah.
So let's go back to hunters now and talk about how do you develop some baseline competencies in each of these areas? Like how do you grow in each of these areas? So how do you think someone, being that you are that hunter dominant, like how do you think someone can actually grow in this?
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say, so I recognize it's difficult for others, but self-revealing is an important component of this.
Self-revealing.
Yeah, like revealing a little bit about yourself. It's the transmitting part of that instinct. It's like put a little bit of yourself out there, reveal a little bit of yourself. Because when you do so, you open yourself up. This is a whole movement of vulnerability. It's like a big thing now. Everybody's talking about vulnerability. Like, that's going to help build trust and all that. Well, that is a strength of the hunter instinct. Not all hunter types are self-revealing, particularly if they are paired up with the farmer instinct as their second. They're going to be a little bit less self-revealing. That is one of the strengths of that instinct. It does so and makes connections and buys a lot of loyalty and desire, really, like heartfelt desire to follow. It's one of them is you don't have to do a lot, but just share a little bit of something. But your experience, don't report. I find it really funny how people have a hard time with this of like self-revealing, and then they start reporting on their day. It's like, that's a report. Like, describe your experience of that. So, well, does it get into emotion? It's not emotional. It's not emotionality at all. It's like, so I had this experience. It felt like this. It opened my eyes to something. I realized this is what was going on for me. And so you share a little bit about yourself like that. It doesn't take much and doesn't have to be deep, dark secrets, but you do a little bit of that and you'll see how far that goes.
Self-disclosure.
Self-disclosure.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. And the other part is to look at change that needs to be made, but do so from the frame where you don't have to do anything big. You don't have to just go, weekend warrior style and change. What's a small change that I can make? And you could do this even personally in your life. Like, I've always wanted to visit this place. Okay? Like, I just had this conversation with somebody at the gym whose primary struggle is change. And it was an interesting thing. And that's what's limiting her from actually excelling because she's really good at what she does.
Yeah.
But she's struggling with that. Like, I don't want to drive into the city. It's like it's a 10-minute, 15-minute drive to the city. Right. It's like, but I don't want to do that because it's just, okay, so here's what I'm going to challenge you to do. Take your boyfriend, go into the city with him as an experiment with no commitment whatsoever. Just, we're going to go in and have a meal. We're going to go have a coffee together.
Nice.
Right? See how that goes. Right? So it's simple things like that you can do to leverage a little bit more of that strength of the instinct, which is, yeah, let's take a risk. Let's try something together.
There's a couple of things I would say to this as far as developing the hunter instinct. I think there is certainty and uncertainty are both universal human desires.
Yeah.
Right? Safety and adventure. And so you have to remind yourself that you do have a sense of adventure. You have to remind yourself that there is something that appeals to you, that you do watch movies where someone is faced with a challenge and they accomplish it, and you watch them excel at the end, and you feel this sense of celebration and joy because of what has been overcome. And I believe that every single person has an overcomer within them. Every single person has this sense in them that they don't want to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They want to have a sense of boldness. They want to be connected to their sense of adventure. And leaning into that, allowing yourself to be inspired by it, and then attaching the words to that you might have had a negative experience with, like risk. But look at the beauty of that risk in that story I just read, in that movie I just saw, in that friend who just shared what they just did. Like, look at the beauty of what they were able to accomplish in that space. And you start to tie positive story to words that might have sparked a bit of fear or trepidation.
Mm-hmm.
And you can be comforted in a phrase like calculated risk. It's not risk for risk's sake,
Yeah.
but understand that you can take one that is calculated and you'll feel that sense of reward or relief either way from doing that. No matter what the positive kind of experiences that comes out of it, you will mitigate some of that feeling that you're missing out on life.
Mm-hmm.
Because when they interview the elderly they know they don't have long to live, and they ask them about regrets, I think it's really interesting that the consistent pattern you see is they do not regret what they did. They regret what they did not do. They regret that they didn't do something that they wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think you can reverse engineer that into this feels fearful now to I don't want to feel like I missed out later.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about leaning into the energy of that, taking a little evaluation of that. And then anything is small steps. Anything is leaning in a little by little, taking small steps and saying, I want to include this as part of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Developing a baseline competency in the farmer instinct.
Yeah, we're still learning that one.
I feel like I have probably the most to say about this because I've had to
do so much work on it.
Oh my gosh. And it's been so overwhelming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I shared a little bit of that story when I had that season where I was very regimented about writing everything down in my schedule. And it's a place I can visit. I can't live there because I'm actually most efficient when I also have freedom, when I can navigate and do things that are interesting. But to develop the baseline competency, I actually needed to relax into the reality that it was making me more free, that it wasn't restricting me.
Mm-hmm.
So we used to, when we first started training in organizations, each time we were kind of reinventing the wheel. And then we got to this point that we go, okay, we've figured out something that works. And it's very repeatable. And we know that this produces this kind of result. And if we take them through this Enneagram Foundations training, and then we take them through a culture of trust, and then we take them through customizing communication based on type, and then intent versus impact, and how to have productive conflict. And they follow this regimen. We found it relaxes us because we can just show up. We know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're never walking in like, what do we need to figure out today? And there's a certain buzz to that, energy to that, but we still have 70% figured out. And then we know we're going to improvise and get like a lot of juice out of that other 30%.
Yeah.
There's been a freedom in learning that some structure is liberating to the other parts of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As it is for other people.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because that keeps coming up even in my certification course. Some of the students have said, Do you have like printed material for some of the stuff that you guys do? And it's like
something you
right.
had just made up on the spot.
Totally. Yes. Yes. And it's like, nope, we don't, not yet. Yeah. That's part of the thing that we're working on. But that is what's helpful is when we have structure that is not a constricting structure, but a structure that allows for growth. That is a strength of the farmer instinct, the ability to know this is the structure, this is what is a rhythm or routine that you can rely on that has predictable results to it. But then also like room for innovation, room for something new to come into that. The other thing for me that's been helpful is learning to use and this is something that maybe we should do for all three instincts. If there's an energy or a rhythm, it's been funny because I've been talking about this as a rhythm. Like it's, the only thing I can think as a drummer, former, used to play drums, hobbyist, around that. But like how different rhythms of the instincts make a difference in how people experience that instinct.
Yeah.
So when I'm doing farmer work, like a project on the house, I have to deliberately enter into that rhythm, which is much more methodical. It has a bit of a slower pace. I mean, even I'll go on YouTube and watch like a video on how to change. I had to change the my headlights on my car. One of them was out. So it's like, I'm telling you, I had to listen to it at 1.5 speed because even the pace at which some of them were instructing how to do it was so slow that I was just like, it was hard for me to stay with it and pay attention to it.
Yes.
But it's like that pace is actually really good for me.
Yeah.
Is to slow the pace down. What do you need? Grab the tools first and then move methodically. And when I think move methodically, it's funny how it's an imitation of that. It's not like I know exactly what methodically means, but it's an imitation of what I've seen. So, that's what I would suggest for, by the way, all three instincts. Imitate what you see because we learn more by imitation than we do by instruction.
Yeah.
And you can embody that. The body is the best way to learn something. It's muscle memory. It's the body has a lot of intuition in it. So, well, imagine what that looks like. See what that looks. Okay, now imitate that. And so I go there and I act like a professional. I act like I'm a mechanic. I imagine that, and then I enter into that.
You slow through the phases of evaluation, diagnostics.
Yeah. It's process very much.
It's like I'm slowing
step.
back.
Yeah.
Instead of going 1-7, I'm going 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. The temptation is to skip, pass through all that, right?
For sure.
But when I do it that way, I realize it preserves energy rather than wastes energy. Because that's the thing that I think is that I'm wasting it. It's killing me. It's so slow. But it preserves energy. And then it's kind of nice when you're done because you're like, wow, that was easy.
Oh my gosh. The pacing that's so important because I've noticed that so much of the stress is when I was trying to do farmer tasks at a hunter pace.
Yeah.
That created so much like anxiety. I think you talk about things that create anxiety in life. That's one of them, is when you're trying to do something at another thing's pace. Like, what is the natural pace and rhythm of this? And I talk about this in the book. It's about like slowing the breath, being more intentional, not trying to rush something. Because as someone who, when I was growing up in school, I knew I was going to run out of focus at a certain point. So I would rush through all of my tests.
Oh, yeah.
Because that was what I was like, I need to hang on to my attention as long as it'll last me. But I'm an adult now, it's like you slow down, you go, I can do this, I can take it apart. And if I don't finish it today, I can come back tomorrow and I can take a step at a time because it's important.
Yeah.
And I don't have to rush through it.
Yeah. And also it's like planning when you're going to do it and not just like, I'm going to squeeze this in between a few things. At the hunter pace.
Freedom.
Yeah.
There's an author talking about on writing, and she's talking about like a scaffolding on which to hold your day. This is going to be the freedom Like you're going to experience so much freedom by having a scaffolding on which to hang your day. And there's something about that I have found liberating. But for all of us who struggle with this as a blind spot and we're trying to develop it, there is a pacing, I think, that we have to remind ourselves that's really important. So, all right, let's talk about developing a baseline competency in the teamer instinct.
Yeah, this is something that, because it's my second, it's not something that I've had to think a whole lot about in terms of developing. But one of the things that I've noticed is how the teamer instinct has a broad, so again, imitation, I think of how do I imitate broad and light? How do I imitate that? And so when I'd be in teamer settings, and when I'm in teamer settings, that's what I adopt. So if we're going to have a family, like we've just went through the holidays, right? So it was like, I went into that with a lot of intentionality of, right, we're meeting with a whole group of people, so broad attention and light attention.
Right.
So I did that and I imitate that. And that's, I think, again, it's very helpful to imagine what that looks like and then to see if you can enter into that rhythm and pace.
Yeah, I like that because there is a pace to just wanting to make light touches throughout the day, like checking in with different people, like thinking about, I think this is something that I've seen people have some success with, where I've even had clients that in the middle of it, I'll have them just kind of go quiet for a minute. For some reason, I've had a lot of clients come to me recently because they're trying to figure out a job change or something and look at different aspects of it. But one of them is just, I want you to go quiet for a few minutes and just think of 3 or 4 people that you haven't maybe recently had some contact with, that you could just ask them what's going on, they're part of your network, and who might actually have some contribution to the space of this question you're trying to ask yourself as far as where you're going in your life. And it could be around a lot of different things. But, you know, who would you want to reach out to? Who's someone who has had a positive impact in you? And I've had people who comes to mind and they end up reaching out and reconnecting with an old mentor or an old boss or an old friend or someone. And then that leads to this, and then this leads to that, and then that leads to that. And that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't actually slowed themselves down enough to go, well, you know, who's someone I could check in with? And then, you know, of course, they go through that, well, I don't want to bother them, or I don't want to interrupt them, or they got their own thing now, or haven't talked to them in forever. The teamer instinct, lets go of all that because it goes, you know, just say, hey. It's like, hey, I was thinking about you. I was going through this process and you came to mind. Like, what's going on with you now? Where are you at? And then it just opens conversation. It opens that light connection. Some people have heard of that concept of the strength of loose ties. So just having these loose ties all around the place and just going in and go, who's someone that I could even connect with that I know would make me feel better? Who's someone I might need to remind today that I exist in a simple capacity? Who's someone I could support? Because even when you do that and you remind yourself of the service you've had, a lot of times that opens up interesting doors to you. So you have to be mindful of the part of you that wants to retreat or to just focus on what's immediately around you, immediate tasks, immediate people. And you're going to lean away from that into, what have I lost touch with that was important to me at some point in time that I want to bring back? I think that's one of the ways you can develop a little bit of this, is to take little moments where you pull back and you go, let me think about my whole story again and the people who have been a part of it. Because no matter where you are in your life, there's been a lot of people that helped you get there.
This is where it has such benefit to so many things, because all you have to do is reach out, think about who could I reach out to today? Just one person.
Yep.
And what does that do? Well, that serves your dominant instinct, as back to that previous talk we had around that. Like it's so beneficial. You don't even realize just what you're doing. But it is very much like, I'm putting little deposits here, over there. And pretty soon that diversification of all of your deposits, for those of you who are farmer types and you're, say, into money and investing money, this is a great metaphor for you to think about diversification from the social sphere.
Yeah.
Like making little deposits. So one of the things that I've been practicing is sometimes I need something and I'm reaching out to somebody because I need something. And I realize I haven't talked with them in a while. So I stop myself. And I simply send hey, how are you?
Yeah.
It's been a while since we've chatted. What's going on in your world? And then it's like, we'll see where that goes. And I'm not fixated on getting my need met. I'm turning that attention into what's good for them, what's good for us. So I think that's been something I've been intentional in practicing around the teamer instinct.
Like I've said, that the teamer instinct is the part of us that longs to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. So what would you respect yourself for if you volunteered in it, invested in it? You hear about something that is going on in your neighborhood, and you say, well, I'm just gonna sign up to participate. Whether it's like the PTO, community organizing event, a church group, a food shelter, whatever it is. You say, I'm going to sign up for this day, and then just see the reward. See if it produces something good in you to where you go, that makes me feel more engaged, more alive. Because again, it's a widening experience. You're going to run into people who you wouldn't normally run into. A friend of ours, she participates part of I think it's a Franciscan group or something down in the city. And they're like, there's plenty of places to get food, but we just wanted to like park a truck in these locations, and we have some basic needs, but it's mostly like coffee and sandwiches. And people just come up and they just have coffee and sandwiches. And the people who do this, who go out, they meet these people and they get in a regular rhythm of meeting people and dialoguing with people who they normally would not have interacted with. And any situation where you can regularly interact with people that you would not normally meet in your day, you wouldn't normally interact with, it's going to produce this in you to strengthen this instinct.
Yeah, it's just, some of you might think, well, joining a group, that's terrifying. How about you start with just by saying hello to more people as you walk by them?
Yeah.
It has a remarkable effect on you. I tried this some years ago as an experiment. I was like, well, let me try saying hello to people I normally don't say hello to and see the response I get. And recently I've come back to that. And so there are people that I see at the gym, but I never say hello to. And so now I've deliberately gone, like, as I go by them, I'm like, hi, how you doing? And the funny thing about it is they smile and they return that. And there's an exchange made.
Yeah.
I think this goes to serving that need that we all have to feel like we're part of something, that connection to others, and to feel that sense of connection. It's just as simple as that. So some people just like reach out, just stretch out a little bit, just say hello and see what happens for you internally and for them as well, as you notice their expression on their face.
So thanks for listening. You can take the new Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers assessment on our website, theartofgrowth.org. That is our new instincts test. And you can order the Hunters, Farmers, and Teamers book on Amazon now. The link is in the show notes. Based on our interactions, we are also adding content to our Instagram about the topic, which is just Art of Growth. And the best way to support the show is to leave us a review wherever you listen and share this episode with someone else. We're hugely grateful for you doing this work with us. Grace and growth, my friends.